A tiny, scruffy puppy wandered the streets alone, his ribs showing through his matted fur. He had no name, no home, and no one to love him. Every day, he roamed the alleys and sidewalks of the city, sniffing for scraps and dodging the kicks of cruel strangers. The world had not been kind to him. People walked past him, ignoring his desperate eyes. Some shooed him away, while others muttered about how stray dogs carried disease. He tried to follow children playing in the park, hoping they would welcome him, but their parents always pulled them away. No matter where he went, rejection followed. One rainy night, he curled up in a cardboard box beside a dumpster, trembling from cold and hunger. His tiny body ached, and his stomach growled in pain. He had seen other strays before, older, bigger dogs who had learned to survive. But he was small, weak, and alone. He had no pack, no family, no one to protect him. As the raindrops soaked through his fur, he lifted his head and let out a soft whimper. A part of him still hoped that somewhere out there, someone would see him. Someone would care. The next morning, the sun rose, casting golden light over the city streets. The puppy stretched his stiff legs and padded toward the marketplace, where the smell of food filled the air. He had learned that if he was lucky, a kind shopkeeper might toss him a scrap. But luck had never been on his side. He sniffed around a butcher's stall, hoping for a discarded bone, but the man behind the counter shouted and swung a broom at him. The puppy yelped and darted away, his tiny paws slipping on the wet pavement. For days, he searched for kindness. He sat outside restaurants, wagging his tail at diners, but they only turned away. He followed a group of children, his tail wagging wildly, but their parents pulled them back. Then, one afternoon, he saw a woman feeding birds in the park. She had gentle eyes, and the way she smiled at the tiny creatures gave him hope. Summoning his courage, he approached her, his tail low but wagging. The woman looked at him for a long moment. The puppy's heart pounded. Would she be the one? But then, she sighed and shook her head. "Oh, little one," she murmured. "You deserve a home, but I can't take you in." She tossed him a small piece of bread, which he eagerly devoured, but as she walked away, he realized, food wasn't what he wanted. He wanted love. On the outskirts of town, in a run-down house that had seen better days, a man sat alone. His name was Daniel, and once, his life had been full of happiness. He had a wife, a son, and a promising career. But fate had been cruel. His wife had passed away in an accident, leaving him broken. His son, unable to handle the grief, had moved to another city. And his job, it had slowly slipped away as depression consumed him. Now, Daniel spent his days in silence. He rarely spoke to anyone, rarely left his home. His world had become a prison of sorrow. But fate works in strange ways. One evening, as Daniel sat on his porch, staring at the empty street, a small figure appeared. A ragged, starving puppy. Daniel watched as the puppy approached cautiously, his ears drooping, his body trembling with exhaustion. He could see the pain in the little dog's eyes, pain that mirrored his own. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, the puppy took a few hesitant steps forward and sat at Daniel's feet. He did not beg, he did not whimper. He simply sat, as if he had chosen this place, this man. Something inside Daniel shifted. He had spent years pushing people away. He had told himself he didn't need anyone. But looking at the little creature in front of him, he saw something he had not seen in a long time. A reason to care. That night, for the first time in years, Daniel did something unexpected. He picked up the puppy. The tiny dog was cold and shivering, his fur tangled and dirty. Daniel carried him inside, wrapping him in an old blanket. The puppy let out a small sigh and snuggled closer. Daniel stared at him, unsure of what he was feeling. He had lost so much. He had told himself he would never let anything close to his heart again. But this puppy had chosen him. Over the next few days, something remarkable happened. Daniel began to care again. He bought a small bag of dog food, though he hadn't shopped for anything other than essentials in years. He bathed the puppy, gently washing away the dirt of the streets. And slowly, cautiously, the puppy's eyes began to shine with trust. Daniel named him Lucky. Lucky followed him everywhere. When Daniel sat on the porch, Lucky curled up at his feet. When he worked on fixing his broken fence, Lucky watched with wagging enthusiasm. And at night, when the loneliness crept in, Lucky would curl up beside him, a tiny ball of warmth against the darkness. Months passed, and Daniel began to change. He started taking morning walks with Lucky, greeting neighbors he had ignored for years. People who had once given him pitiful glances now smiled and waved. Lucky had become more than a pet, he was a symbol of hope. One day, Daniel's son, whom he hadn't spoken to in years, called unexpectedly. "I heard you got a dog," his son said, hesitation in his voice. Daniel smiled. "Yeah, he found me." There was silence on the other end. Then, his son chuckled softly. "Maybe I should visit sometime." And just like that, something Daniel had thought was lost forever, connection, began to return. Lucky had saved him, not with words, not with grand gestures, but simply by choosing him. The lonely stray, the dog no one had wanted, had finally found his forever home. And in doing so, he had healed a broken heart. Because sometimes, we don't choose who saves us. Sometimes, they choose us.